Welcome to the ParentNet podcast by Focus on the Family Singapore. In each episode, we will be speaking with everyday parents and practitioners as they share with us gems from their parenthood journey. Keep tuning in to learn with us as we figure it out together.
Hello and welcome to the ParentNet podcast. My name is EJ and I'm your host for this episode. Today we are exploring the phenomenon of youths turning to drugs. And I'm so pleased to have Dr. Adrian Loh, a Senior Consultant Psychiatrist, to shed more light on this topic. Dr. Loh, it's great to have you on our ParentNet podcast episode. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on this show, EJ. I've heard so much about Focus on the Family over the years, so it's nice. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Maybe to kick us off in our podcast, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
All right, so I'm actually a consultant psychiatrist in the area of child and adolescent psychiatry. So about 3/4 of the patients I see are in the teenagers and young children age group, the other quarter being mainly adults. Currently working in private practice at a clinic called Promises. At the same time, I also do some visiting consultant work with Child Guidance Clinic at IMH, as well as also do some work outside other ministries. Previously, prior to joining Promises about 3 years ago, I was working in the public sector too. So that's where a lot of my, previous experience came about from. Right now, I'm a member of the National Council Against Drug Abuse, NCADA, and today I come here really, to be able to try to share a bit about the pressures which youth are facing that may be causing them to turn to drugs. And that's really the the main message that I'm here today. This is really the concern that the National Council Against Drug Abuse, NCADA, that might be new for some listeners, NCADA. That's our goal, is really to help people, to help society, to be able to, how can we better go about carrying out our preventive drug education efforts. In short, we call it PDE, but basically preventive drug education efforts, helping families, parents, and both parents and youth, as well as various organizations, to better understand how to address this problem.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. I'm sure today, as we tune in to this episode of the Parent Podcast, we'll be enriched because this topic is really up your alley. Clinical experience will really benefit all the parents who are listening in. So let's dive in straight away with the first question I have on my mind really for you. This topic of drug abuse prevention, it is probably not new. Singapore historically does have a very strong stance regarding drug usage.
Yes.
But times have really changed. We are living in probably a very increasingly digital and very connected age for youths and families today. So my question for you is, why is drug abuse prevention still highly relevant for families today?
You're right to point out that indeed this preventive drug education has been going on ever since we were independent as a country, I believe. Singapore is well known around the world for have a hard stance against drugs. I think from the time you bought an aircraft bound for Singapore, you always be warned about not bringing drugs to Singapore, and schools, in army camps, in workplaces, the message about drugs is very strong. In a way, you can almost assume that, as a parent, it's quite easy to feel that, it's okay, I think my child is growing up in Singapore. In school, they'll reinforce the message. It's not easy to get drugs here in Singapore. Okay, so why not just take a step back and just let the society take care of him and or her? It's not going to be an issue. But the truth is that statistics do raise a concern for us. Even the 2025 data that coming out from CNB, half of the new drug abusers arrested were under the age of 30. Half, so you're wondering wow, I thought drugs is an old thing, why should there be so many people who are caught? But unfortunately, it is still a very pertinent issue. So number one, I think one reason why we need to be concerned is just the sheer numbers that's still being arrested for the use of drugs. Okay, and in a way, partially because there's so much more attention towards other addictions these days, right? Especially digital cyber addictions. In a way, it's easy to turn around and just okay, I think that's a done deal already. It's really this area of drugs. We can leave it to other agencies to handle. We handle now the biggest thing is now the digital issues. But unfortunately, we can't really neglect these efforts. They're still very important. I think the second reason why we really need to continue these efforts is, in the past, if you think about it, decades past, for any of our youth to have access drugs, it actually takes quite a bit of effort. The drugs were to come in across the border, sneaked in across the borders, smuggled in. Some sort of transaction has to take place through physical, meet up with a buyer, with a seller. So probably that comes into maybe certain gang contacts. So it can be quite hard to actually get your hands upon drugs unless you're already socializing with the people who have already access to drugs. However, the world has changed a lot. The access to drugs is a lot easier these days. We do know online platforms that readily are able to provide these kind of drug supplies. We do know that at places like clubs and all that, even though clubs do try to enforce, no drugs and all that, but there are ways that people do get their fixes through these places. Then of course, the borders are quite porous these days. If people feel it's hard to get in Singapore, it's not too difficult to possibly get it across the causeway, some form or the other. So I think these are various reasons that I think leave us cause for concern. Of course, the touch points with drug, the first access is actually happening a lot earlier compared to the past. In the past, it was all having to meet up with physically, and now you have it all online transactions.
Wow, I mean, as I hear you share about the numbers in the report from CNB that came out in 2025, I'm personally am shocked, where increasing numbers of young people below 30 years old are taking on drugs. And I totally agree with you, that right now drugs are definitely much more easily accessible as of today as compared to before. So as I'm taking on the role and the head of a parent listening to you, I'm really concerned, even though my child is only in primary 5, but I am, and I think I should be very concerned, with the influences that my child is exposed to and the potential kind of avenues that drugs can come in from.
That's right.
So I think the question that I have, and probably many parents who are tuning in have, is this then, from your clinical experience as well, what are the good and some of the strong protective factors at home that would help keep children away from harmful substances?
That's a really important question. So what families can do, because you live in a society whereby it's quite porous, but at the end of the day, families still provide that sentinel at home, the ones who really guard the child, provide the guardrails, and be able to help them to fend off against all these kind of influences outside. So I think it really starts with the family. One of the things that maybe we can, in a sense, go back to is really trying to create a positive parenting environment. Traditionally, I suppose if you look at it in the society, we have a very hard stance against drugs. So it's very easy also for parents to just mirror that, and essentially from a young age, anytime there's a mention of drugs, just really take a very hard-fisted approach and say, drugs are dangerous for you, drugs will cause you harm, drugs will, you can land in jail, you can even be death penalty. So from a young age, you can just use it like a fear factor, and just say that, make sure you never get into drugs, don't let me catch you. Don't basically give a very fear-based message towards children, from a young age towards their teenage years. But as the world changes and all that, our children, our teenagers, they're also being parented online. They're also being exposed to all kinds of messages online, some of which can actually make a case for how drugs are not that bad. Perhaps there's a case for using drugs for medical users. Maybe drugs can make people feel better if they're feeling sad or anxious. So this is the message that people are facing online. They're also facing sometimes some glamorization of some sort of, inverted commas, recreational drug use overseas. Sometimes they also hear of celebrities who are being checked in for drug rehabilitation overseas. And even though maybe for rehabilitation, but the message sent is that it's quite a normal practice happening. So for parents, I think to engage their children from a young age, I think they do need to take a firm approach, but at the same time to also be warm about it, to have very open communication. So I would say that as parents at home, I think one of the things that really from a young age, I think that's never too young. So from the time that they're able to absorb media and all that, whenever there's any kind of exposure to any sort of a hint that there's a use of drugs, a parent can really proactively talk about it, depending on the age group, being able to share a relevant message with them. If they're very young, of course, no complicated message, just say that it's not good for your body, it's not good for your mind, we want to stay away from things which are unhealthy, so this is something, so mommy and daddy don't want you to ever get into this. But as you grow older, I think you really need to actually try to leave the communication channels open. So I think one very practical point is really to ask them what are they hearing about it, what have they heard from other teens about it, what have they seen in shows about it. Try to ask open-ended questions, be genuinely curious, and not to assume that as a parent you know everything, but just really hear from your tween or teen or what's happening in school. Because sometimes I think what they hear out there, it can be very eye-opening. I've come across myself both as a psychiatrist and as a parent myself. Yeah, this is really quite, in some sense it can be considered alarming, but maybe it can be quite eye-opening also, just to hear what are the things that's going out there, how readily available some of these things are, what people think about it outside, and try as best to really to ask these open questions. It's important, of course, at some juncture to inject the necessary guidance, but try not to jump into establishing and get the guidance right up front, but ready to understand the situation better. And also understand maybe a bit on as they share about the phenomenon of drug taking that their youth have maybe exposed to in schools or in other social environments. Maybe ask them, how about these people who are taking it, what drives them to doing it. You'll find that actually a lot of people who are using drugs, some of it may be out of curiosity, and that's something that we do also acknowledge, how do we fight this curiosity element. But for many, I think I'll say the majority of people who are using drugs, it still comes from a place of trying to self-help. What I mean by self-help, we do know that a lot of times with the drug abuse, it is associated with people who are actually having a lot of anxiety, depression, other sort of stressors in their life. And also, sometimes drug taking is a way for them to cope, just like many other kind of like addictive habits, whether not drinking or smoking, gambling. All these are means for people to, in a sense, escape from their problems, to be able to make themselves feel better. I guess a common problem also is loneliness. A lot of people are lonely, so sometimes in doing this sort of like getting into some sort of addictive habit is a chance to also meet other people who have similar sort of habits. And so I think trying to identify and understand with our youth what the situation is, and then along the way, of course, then providing them the necessary accurate advice. Like for example, if our youth like come home with misunderstandings why drugs are still should be legalized, then really trying to ask them why they think so, and then really trying to give the perspective on why it shouldn't be legalized, perhaps the experience of countries, whereby the legalization has led to more problems and the social problems that's been come about because of the proliferation of drug use. Yeah. So to really engage them, also based on their, I guess, the chronological age as well as their mental maturity, find the most appropriate ways to engage them.
So open conversation is really, really important. As I hear that constantly comes out as you share with us some of the things to be mindful of. Yes, open conversation and very strong, open, warm relationship with our children.
That's right, yeah.
And I can totally attest to this, and I think that it is really important because, as you have mentioned earlier, we are seeing the global culture is where drug use seems to be normalized, but because our children have access to the internet and they're seeing news that are happening overseas, what are the celebrities getting themselves into? So they have a lot of questions their mind. I mean, they won't immediately jump to using drugs, but they have a lot of questions. And if they come home, I can imagine, they present the scenario to the parents, and if just like what you have mentioned, we jump straight in and we start hammering them and putting on a very hard stance, we close the communication channel. So it's still important. They are very inquisitive, children, teenagers. So allow them to ask questions and we respond and hear back from them. So keeping the conversation channels open as well. Right?
Exactly. And I forgot to mention, I guess it's not just about them coming home, but these days, I guess, as we travel out with them into the region, we'll encounter shops which have the cannabis symbol, the green leaf symbol. So they're going to be asking questions, right? Oh, mommy, daddy, why are there so many shops around here with that nice green color leaf? Oh, what's this flavor that's being offered in those countries? The cannabis can be infused into for many sort of foods and all that. And so I think these are practical opportunities. I guess I can think of the opportunities to educate them about the proliferation, why it's happening, what are the concerns, why Singapore has taken the stance that this shouldn't be allowed really for their well-being. So it's really as you go on the world that we are going to encounter these.
Totally agree. So seize the opportune moments, right? When you're traveling overseas, when you spot a good moment, an educative moment, or it could be when you're walking in Singapore, now that we have a lot of drug abuse prevention messaging, public campaigns that are happening, when you see some of these things, these are good opportunities to share with children on. So I'm sure at this point, listeners, as you're tuning in, start jotting down the notes that Dr. Adrian have mentioned, and I think one of the key points that Dr. Adrian have mentioned earlier is about parents us modeling for them. We face problems in life, and often people in general who turn to drugs maybe be looking for an outlet, an avenue of escapism. So I feel like for children, may be considering like drug use as an way of coping. Parents, you play an important role to help them, to guide them, what are healthier ways to handle setbacks in life, and you need not turn to substance use per se. I asked another question here, Doctor. There are parents who were like on a more preventive stance, as we mentioned, as we talked about earlier. But there are maybe some parents who are listening in and they are worried for their kids, or suspicious that their kids might be drifting into sort of like high-risk behavior, which includes drug use. Could you share with us a little bit more, like what are some telltale signs to be watchful of?
Okay, I think one of the things that as parents to really keep a lookout for is perhaps significant changes in a young person's life. As our children go into their tweens and then to the teenage years, adolescence, there's going to be a lot of different changes that they experience, from just the changes of puberty, losing friendships, maybe academic pressures, change to a new school. So all these kind of situations will actually bring about very strong emotions. And I think during these times, there may be, of course, a lot of vulnerability towards experiencing mental health distress, whether they're not feeling very anxious about changes or feeling like perhaps a bit getting into a period of low mood because of some losses in their lives. In those times, actually, these are vulnerable periods. These are periods whereby people may be looking for ways to cope. So I think these are the junctures whereby as parents, we can really be lookout for how our youth are coping. Of course, drug use is only one way, of course, which they may be coping. There could be, of course, others like digital addictions or the pornography use, or even like getting to in-out relationships. These are all ways that people may be coping through various kind of social stressors. So I think parents do have to be on the lookout for all these different areas. But today, I guess we want to really zoom in on the fact that drug use is still something that can happen. And in a sense, every one of our youth are still at risk. So really to urge parents to be on the lookout for this. That comes in with the idea that parents play that forward role to be able to guide their use in this area. Other things to look out for is their responsibilities. So I think as adults, we are working, so most of our responsibilities are about work. If they drop, we'll be concerned. And likewise for our youth, as they're in school, that's their main role in society, I suppose. And so we notice any changes in the area, perhaps dropping grades, or perhaps feedback from teachers that they don't seem so focused in school, or perhaps attendance issues, maybe like frequently developing all sorts of reasons for not going to school. It's a little telltale signs that perhaps something's not going so well. So I might really have to take an opportunity not to ask interrogative sort of questions, but really just to maybe take your child aside for a one-to-one date to ask some of these questions, like, hey, son, I noticed that recently, not looking so good. Or maybe for your daughter, I think it's been a big change for you since you, gone up from Sec 2 to Sec 3, something like this, right? Of course, not to confront them directly, but really to warm up, talk about other things, and then hopefully have a chance to be able to hear their concerns. Ask them about their friends too. I mean, again, when we ask about our friends, we have to be quite careful not to come across as being judgmental. So these are some of the signs that we might see in our youth, the changes, the function is dropping and all that. I think in this day and age also, social media also plays quite a big role of perhaps signaling. Where possible, of course, it would be great if parents use social media as friends, as followers. That's if they allow you to. but sometimes we do know that oftentimes that may not happen. And understandably so, I guess there's no one-size-fits-all sort of policy on this. Yeah, but I think where possible, if you're able to get clues through the social media, that can be valuable too. I think sometimes clues may come from other friends who actually know your children, and maybe if they were concerned, they may actually share you that, hey auntie, I noticed that your daughter recently, she's been posting some really sad things on her social media, or I've seen she seems to be on at 3 a.m. at night or something like that. So these are change in social media habits and the content that what they're posting or what they're following. More overtly, of course, when it comes to the use of drugs, maybe suspicious behavior. For example, what we do know that drugs are available on some of these online messaging channels, for example, Telegram and all that. So evasive use of Telegram and all that. Of course, Telegram is very widely used among you. So after this podcast, don't go around being overly suspicious. But certainly if there's been a quite heavy recent use of it, and there's some hiding or who they're in contact with, let listeners know that that this sometimes we do need to find out a bit further. There seems to be a lot of use of these online channels. I think something else also that may happen practically is that if they really are using drugs, then of course you may be able to see telltale signs ranging from if it's drugs that comes through associated with vaping, like what we had last year in K-pods, you might get fruity odors from the vape fluid. You might also notice powders, you might notice perhaps stains on the clothes and all that. Yeah, so these are some other telltale signs of possible, or perhaps suspicious of containers, packaging. And these are things which will really alarm us. But hopefully it doesn't reach that stage, because I guess by the time it reaches that stage, then we're in a different territory of having to really seek active drug-related help. Hopefully we can pick up the telltale signs early on, when they're at the high-risk stage.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. So just to recap some of the telltale signs that Dr. Adrian has mentioned earlier, they include things like if you notice some noticeable change in behavior or mood in your child, or a drift or shift away from some of their usual interests. So these are some of the changes that are happening. Or, of course, being students, their grades or their socialization in schools or attendance in school is being affected. I think these does warrant our attention. And of course, if you see that their device or social media usage does pop up some weirder than norm kind of situations, we should be relatively concerned. However, if you heard Dr. Adrian earlier, the concern should not translate immediate to fear and we start jumping and criticizing our children, drawing very hard stance, right?
That's right. Don't jump in too quickly.
Don't jump in too quickly.
To just, if you see any red flags or any warning signs, it's a cue for us to try to understand more first. It's not a cue to have that conversation. Are you doing something wrong? Are you mixing wrong company? Then I think that will close all the communication channels. So really, it's a cue that we need to pay, in fact, probably a bit more attention. I think one of the things that I think is very evident in Singapore life is that I think many parents are very busy. That's the reality of life. Lots of busy parents, and of course, busy parents still having to attend to many other commitments to their families and other outside work commitments. So sometimes that can really make it hard to have the active communication, even though we want to have that. So if anything, if you do notice any warning signals, all the more you want to really try to build those bridges and not try to burn them in the moment you sense something's happening. Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah. Being a working parent myself, and I'm sure all those who are listening in, you are also a busy working parent. It's very easy when we spot a possible issue that we want to be very quick to jump in and correct it.
Yes.
But I think as we hear from Dr. Adrian, again, it's a reminder that this is an opportune time to connect and have a conversation with our children, to draw out, to find out what's happening in school, what's happening in their lives, before jumping to any quick conclusion or any judgment on them. So Dr. Adrian, today we have heard a lot from you about and the importance of having conversations with our children. And I'm sure there's a pool of parents who have younger children as well, who probably would like to hear from you, So conversations are important. The messaging about drug abuse prevention is important, but how early should we start these kind of conversations? Are there any templated script, or there are some principles that you would recommend young parents or parents to follow?
I think I'll say that probably in terms of mental maturity, the earliest we can start practically will be probably in the primary school years. Maybe earlier than that, if there's a really fleeting contact with the ideas that's seen in some sort of show or what, you can just say it's a bad habit, or maybe equate it to something like smoking, and all that. That's good enough, I think, for the toddler age group or the preschooler. But once you go to primary school, I believe they are capable of understanding a bit more, and then that's where we can help them to understand what drugs are, equating them to other sort of unhealthy substances, so whether or not it's cigarettes or perhaps too much alcohol, and how these things can actually be bad for our health, not just affecting our body, but also affecting our mind, affecting our behavior, making us sometimes feel sad, making us feel bad. So using child-friendly language. I think one of the things that, of course, we acknowledge that some of these concepts, especially when they're very young, we don't want to perhaps overload them with too much technical information, but really just broad ideas about that something that's negative, that's bad for the health and all that. Our schools actually have the Parents Gateway. Through the Parents Gateway, the Ministry of Education actually does from time to time actually send out some of the educational materials developed together with NCADA's support, the National Council Against Drug Abuse. Some of these parent education materials they can use with younger children. I think this is, of course, something that's work in progress. I think as we continue to face this problem, we do need to develop more, especially localized content that's able to communicate the problem of drugs, particularly in a local setting. If you go to the National Library also, there's actually, there are books on this topic also that will be appropriate to our local cultural context also in this area. We do hope in time to come, NCADA realizes that there are parents who also do want to get this message out to their children, but at the same time, although the materials are out there, but may not be the easiest to find these materials, especially when they're meant to be something that's age appropriate, something that's culturally contextualized. So this is something that efforts are in progress in the sense to try to develop these sort of materials, that be able to curate them so that it's a really resource for parents. Then I think for parents, I think this also, it's not working alone. Raising a child takes a village, right? That's why I think making sure that everyone's aligned on this, from parents to grandparents. We can often work with schools. Schools often also do actually have anti-drug messaging, part of the preventive drug education efforts. So this is something whereby parents can take the effort to really better understand what schools are sharing with their children about this and to be able to amplify those messages. In fact, the past 2 years, the NCADA has been working together with the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Central Narcotics Bureau, try to go out to the public to help them understand more about the dangers of drug use. And what they've done is actually, in conjunction with an event that they call Remembering the Drug Victims Day every year, I think in May, they will actually set up a booth, a roving exhibition. There will be information put out about the problems with drugs, but also very interesting exhibits, games also integrated with some sort of like storyline and all that. And last year's one, which I think I remember is in Suntec City, it was actually fairly child friendly. You can bring a child there and children can actually see what these things that we call drugs, what they look like, how people suffer from them. And I think last year's pop-up, which was at Suntec, if I recall correctly, that was really tracing the story of someone who had, in a sense, had passed on from drugs as a story from drug use. So along the way, they get to see the impact of drug use upon not just the individual, but the whole family and all that. Yeah, so I think that we will try to provide opportunities for engaging the public, helping parents to teach their young ones about drugs. But at the same time, yeah, it really does take some conscious effort from busy parents to bring your children to such kind of exhibitions and all that. So I mean, keep a lookout, because I think on Parents Gateway, I think later in the year, we will definitely try to get the word out on further preventive drug education efforts. And especially if there are these very interesting interactive sort of displays, we really do hope that more parents will be able to take up the invitation to come and visit and bring your children, even young primary school age, I guess even preschoolers, to try to help them better understand what's this thing that we call drugs. I think teenagers can go to, but when you go to teenagers, make sure, again, asking curious questions and not to preach at them. Yeah.
Yes, so parents, as you're tuning in, you've heard from Dr. Adrian. Start young. Primary school, I think we can start to have a conversation, but you can consider even starting even younger. But what's important is the conversation should be using age-appropriate languages to explain to the children. We don't need to over-explain sometimes, and just facilitate a conversation. As the children brings forth the question, then we can bounce it back forth. That's what conversation it's all about. And of course, if you're looking for unique or interesting resources. I mean, there are public education materials. There are even on the parent gateway in schools, your children are in, you will receive anti-drug kind of messaging and campaign that has been distributed out. I'm a parent of a P5 kid and I have received a similar form of messaging from the NCADA as well through the school. So I remember that was a good evening across dinner where my son just came back and shared, today in school we learned about don't use drugs, assembly talks. Then there was this material that was distributed on Parent Gateway and we had a good dinner conversation about
I'm so glad to hear that it reached you. So inspiring to our listeners. Indeed, it's very good to see that you as a parent, how you're using these materials too.
Yeah, so I guess it takes intentionality. As we have mentioned a lot in this podcast, the importance of having conversation. It takes intentionality as a parent to anchor these conversations with our children on why they should not turn to drugs, and behind it anchoring around the values that as a family we believe in. So I want to thank you, Dr. Loh, for sharing your insights on the issue of drug use among youth through this ParentNet podcast with us. I'm sure this is a very important topic and your insights have benefited many of the parents who are listening in. As we come to the end of this podcast, any final encouragements you would like to share with parents who are listening to us?
I think I recognize that it's not an easy conversation to have with a child or teenager about drugs. Part of it is actually perhaps maybe fear about, do I have the answers to the questions? Sometimes some part of it is like, will I isolate my child further, thinking that I'm there to just teach them and preach to them again? But what we've really seen in the National Drug Perception Survey is that actually for those youths who actually said that parents were very proactive in helping them talk about drug issues, actually about 95% of them actually said that really helped them stay off drugs. So I think the data is very telling that for those who actually have that early influence through their parents, it does really help them to stay away from drugs, even though as parents sometimes we wonder, is it really going to help and all that, but the data really shows that in the context of warm parenting, the right messages given to our children really does help them to stay away from these kind of dangerous kind of activities such as drug use. So that's an encouragement to all listeners. Never easy parenting in today's world, but with hopefully we can work together as a community to help each other in this. Thanks so much, EJ. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adrian, for your encouragement to us and to remind us parents that every of our conversation and our modeling efforts to our children matters to them in the long run, in the short run as well, to encourage and inspire our children. So once again, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to our ParentNet podcast. For more parenting resources, do visit our website at family.org.sg. That's all that we have for you today. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. Do keep tuning in to the ParentNet podcast to learn and grow in your parenting journey.